I'm Virginia, 34 female. I live in what I thought was a quiet suburban neighborhood in a small house with a big yard that I bought 2 years ago. It's just me and my best friend, a 3-year-old Labrador mix named Buster. I work from home as a graphic designer, so my peaceful home environment is everything to me. But that peace was shattered by a neighbor who decided to turn a minor disagreement into a malicious attack on the most important thing in my life. And he almost got away with it. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Buying my own home was the culmination of a decade of hard work and disciplined saving. It wasn't a mansion, just a modest 2-bedroom bungalow, but it was mine. The biggest selling point was the backyard. It was a sprawling, grassy rectangle of potential, perfect for my dog, Buster. He's a rescue, a goofy, lovable lab mix with floppy ears and a tail that never stops wagging. After years of apartment living, giving him a yard to run in was my #1 priority. For the first year, life was idyllic. I settled in, planted a small garden, and spent countless hours throwing a tennis ball for Buster. My immediate neighbors were pleasant enough, a young family on one side and a quiet older couple on the other. And then there was Mr. Finch. Mr. Wallace Finch lived in the immaculate 2-story house directly to my right. He was a man who seemed to be perpetually annoyed by the world's failure to live up to his exacting standards. He was in his late 50s, with a stern, hawkish face and a military-straight posture. I learned from another neighbor, Sarah Jenkins, that he was a retired building inspector and the current, self-appointed president of our Voluntary Homeowners Association. Voluntary was the key word. Most of us paid the minimal yearly dues for things like maintaining the front entrance sign, but Mr. Finch treated the HOA like a governing body with absolute authority. Sarah, a warm and pragmatic stay-at-home mom who lived across the street, warned me about him on my first week. "Just keep your lawn mowed and your trash cans out of sight, and you should be fine," she'd said with a knowing smile. Wallace can be particular. That turned out to be the understatement of the year. My first run-in with Mr. Finch was over a garden gnome. It was a gag gift from my brother, a ridiculously cheerful little thing with a fishing rod. I placed it among my tomato plants where it was barely visible from the street. 2 days later, a crisp, computer-printed note was taped to my front door. Subject: Yard Ornament Violation, it read. Per HOA Guideline 7.4b, all lawn decorations must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Please remove the non-compliant statuary at your earliest convenience. The Architectural Review Committee, I later found out, consisted of Mr. Finch and his wife. I found it absurd, but not worth a fight. I moved the gnome to the backyard. This was the opening salvo in what would become a quiet, one-sided war of attrition. Mr. Finch seemed to have a sixth sense for any perceived infraction. My garbage cans were left out 2 hours past the designated 7 p.m. cutoff. I'd get a note. A small patch of dandelions appeared near my driveway. Another note, this time with the relevant section of the HOA bylaws highlighted in yellow. He never spoke to me directly. It was always these passive-aggressive, formally worded notes, as if we were engaged in a legal dispute rather than a neighborly disagreement. I did my best to comply. I wasn't looking for trouble, I just wanted to live peacefully. I set a reminder on my phone to bring in the trash cans. I spent a weekend weeding my entire lawn by hand. I wanted to give him no ammunition. The real point of contention, however, was my dog, Buster. From the beginning, Mr. Finch made his disdain for my dog clear. He never complained directly, but his actions spoke volumes. If Buster was in the backyard and let out a single, happy bark, Mr. Finch would appear at his window, staring down with a look of pure irritation. If Buster's tennis ball accidentally rolled under the shared fence, Mr. Finch would retrieve it with a pair of barbecue tongs and drop it back over as if it were contaminated waste. Buster, for his part, was the friendliest dog imaginable. He was well-trained, never jumped on anyone, and his barking was minimal. He was my family, and Mr. Finch's silent, seething disapproval felt deeply personal. The fence between our properties was a standard 4-foot chain link fence. It was there when I bought the house, and while it wasn't beautiful, it was functional. It kept Buster safely in my yard. One afternoon, Mr. Finch approached me as I was getting my mail. It was the first time he'd spoken to me in over a year. "Ms. Miller," he begged. And not using my first name, "That fence is an eyesore. It's rusting in several places and is not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of this neighborhood." I was taken aback. "Hello, Mr. Finch, it's Virginia. The fence is a bit old, but it's sturdy." He sniffed, his gaze sweeping over my property with disapproval. "Chainlink is expressly discouraged in the updated bylaws. A 6-foot privacy fence would be more appropriate. I trust you'll see to its replacement promptly." He then turned and walked away before I could even respond. I checked the bylaws he'd left in my mailbox when I first moved in. Chain-link fences were indeed discouraged for new installations, but there was a grandfather clause for existing structures. His demand was baseless. This, I decided, was a line I wouldn't let him cross. A new fence would cost thousands of dollars I didn't have, all to appease his personal taste. I wrote him a polite but firm letter, quoting the grandfather clause and stating that while I would ensure the existing fence was maintained, I had no plans to replace it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That letter wasn't an end, it was a declaration of war. His campaign of petty notes stopped. The silence that followed was far more unnerving. He would watch me from his window when I was in the yard with Buster, his expression cold and calculating. I could feel his anger radiating across the lawn, a palpable, toxic energy. Sarah noticed the shift too. "Be careful, Virginia," she warned me over coffee one morning. "A man like Wallace doesn't just let things go. When he gets quiet, it means he's planning something." I knew she was right. I just never could have imagined how low he would be willing to stoop. My little slice of heaven was starting to feel like a battlefield, and my neighbor from hell was just getting started. After my refusal to replace the fence, Mr. Finch's strategy shifted from passive-aggressive notes to a more insidious form of psychological warfare. His focus narrowed from my property as a whole to the single thing he knew I cared about most: Buster. He seemed to understand that any direct attack on me would be met with reasoned, documented resistance. Attacking my dog, however, was a way to bypass logic and go straight for the emotional jugular. His methods were subtle at first, designed to create an atmosphere of constant, low-grade anxiety. It began with his landscaping. Along the shared fence line, he planted a row of thorny, dense rose bushes. While they were on his property, they were planted so close to the chain link that the thorny branches grew through the gaps, creating a hazardous barrier. Buster, who loved to run the perimeter of the yard, once came back to the patio with a long, shallow scratch along his flank. I was furious. I trimmed the branches that protruded into my yard, making sure not to cut anything on his side of the property line. The next day, he was out there with a bag of fertilizer, meticulously tending to the bushes, encouraging them to grow thicker and more invasive. It was a clear message. This was his new weapon. His surveillance also intensified. I had a security camera pointed at my driveway and front door, a standard precaution. But the way Mr. Finch watched me felt far more personal. Whenever I let Buster out into the backyard, Mr. Finch would inevitably appear on his back deck or at his kitchen window, phone in hand. At first, I thought he was just being a nosy neighbor. Then I realized he was recording. He would film Buster running, playing, and occasionally barking at a squirrel. He made no attempt to hide it. He wanted me to see him, to feel judged and monitored. It was incredibly unnerving. I started keeping a log of these incidents, noting the date and time he would record us. I felt like I was building a case for a restraining order, which seemed like a crazy overreaction, but his behavior was becoming increasingly obsessive. The situation came to a head over a small landscaping project I undertook. I decided to build a raised garden bed along the back of my property, far from his fence line. It required several deliveries of lumber and soil. The delivery trucks were large and had to park on the street for short periods. Each time, Mr. Finch would march out of his house, clipboard in hand, documenting everything. He took photos of the truck's license plate, timed how long it was parked, and measured the distance of its tires from the curb. He submitted 3 separate complaints to the city about commercial obstructions in a residential zone. Each complaint was dismissed, as the trucks were there for less than 30 minutes and were legally parked. But the intent was clear: to harass me and disrupt my life in any way he could. The final straw for him seemed to be the day I had friends over for a barbecue. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were being perfectly reasonable. Music was playing at a low volume, and we were just chatting on the patio. Buster was thrilled to have company and was greeting everyone with tail wags and happy little grunts. He barked exactly twice, once when the mailman came and once when a rabbit darted across the lawn. At 3 p.m. sharp, Mr. Finch appeared on his deck. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, arms crossed, phone out, recording us. My friends were visibly uncomfortable. "Who is that guy?" one of them asked. "That's my neighbor," I said, trying to sound casual. "He's the unofficial neighborhood watch." The mood was soured. The feeling of being watched, of having our quiet gatherings scrutinized and documented, was too invasive. My friends left earlier than planned. That night, seething with a sense of violated privacy, I knew I had to do something. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought 2 more security cameras. These weren't for the front of the house. I installed one on the back corner of my roof, angled to cover my entire backyard, especially the fence line I shared with Mr. Finch. I installed the second one on the side of my house, overlooking the narrow patch of grass between our homes. I made sure they were visible. I wanted him to know that if he was going to watch me, I was going to watch him right back. I felt a small surge of empowerment as I finished the installation and checked the crystal-clear, wide-angle feeds on my computer. I could see every inch of my property. I believe seeing those cameras was what pushed him over the edge. It was a direct challenge to his campaign of intimidation. He could no longer stand on his deck and record me without being recorded himself. His primary tool of harassment had been neutralized. For about a week, there was an eerie calm. He stopped his overt surveillance. The thorny bushes remained, but he no longer tended to them with such provocative zeal. I naively allowed myself to hope that perhaps he had finally given up, that my countermove had worked. I should have known better. A man like Wallace Finch doesn't give up. He just changes tactics. He retreats into the shadows and looks for a new, more damaging weapon. And he found one. He decided to move beyond notes and complaints and fabricate a vicious lie, a lie that would bring a uniformed officer to my door and threaten to tear my little family apart. The knock came on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't the friendly rap of a delivery driver or the soft tap of my neighbor Sarah. It was a loud, authoritative series of 3 distinct raps that echoed through my quiet house. Buster, who was snoozing at my feet in my home office, shot up instantly, letting out a low, questioning growl. My heart immediately started to pound. It was the kind of knock that signaled official business, the kind that nobody ever wants to receive. I smoothed down my t-shirt and walked to the door, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. When I looked through the peephole, the knot cinched even tighter. A man in a dark green uniform stood on my porch. He was holding a clipboard, and his vehicle, parked at the curb, was clearly marked with the emblem of the city's animal control department. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. My mind raced, trying to find a reason for this visit. Had Buster somehow gotten out? I just let him in from the backyard less than an hour ago. Was he barking? No, he'd been silent all morning. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my shaking hands, and opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sounding much smaller and more fragile than I wanted. The officer was a man in his late 30s with a serious, no-nonsense expression. His name tag read Davis. "Are you Virginia Miller?" he asked, his eyes scanning me and then glancing down at the paperwork on his clipboard. "Yes, that's me," I replied. Buster had padded up behind me and was now peeking around my legs, his tail giving a tentative wag. Officer Davis's eyes flickered down to Buster, and his expression hardened slightly. "Ma'am, we've received a formal complaint regarding your dog. The report alleges that this animal has been designated as at large and has exhibited aggressive behavior towards a neighbor." The words didn't register at first. "At large, aggressive," I repeated, dumbfounded. He's never gotten out of the yard, ever, and he's the least aggressive dog you'll ever meet. Officer Davis remained impassive. The complaint filed by your neighbor, Mr. Wallace Finch, states that yesterday afternoon, your dog escaped your property, entered his yard, and acted in a threatening manner, growling and baring its teeth. He states he felt his safety was at risk. I stared at him in utter disbelief. A wave of dizziness washed over me. It was a complete and total fabrication. Yesterday afternoon, I had been on a lengthy video conference call for work from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Buster had been in the house with me the entire time, sleeping on his bed in my office. He hadn't even been in the backyard during TH. At period. That's impossible, I stammered, feeling the blood drain from my face. That is a lie. My dog was inside with me all afternoon yesterday. He couldn't have been in Mr. Finch's yard. Mr. Finch was quite specific about the time, Officer Davis said, his tone unwavering. He claims it happened at approximately 3:15 p.m. He also mentioned this is an ongoing issue with the animal not being properly secured. My mind reeled. Mr. Finch? Of course. This was his new plan. This was his revenge for the fence, for the cameras, for my refusal to bow to his petty tyranny. He had concocted a lie so serious that it required an official response, a lie that painted my sweet, gentle dog as a public menace. Officer, my neighbor has been harassing me for months, I pleaded, my voice cracking with desperation. This is his way of escalating things because he's angry about an HOA dispute. This whole story is a fantasy. The officer's expression didn't soften. I could see it from his perspective. He had a signed, formal complaint from one citizen against another. My frantic denials probably sounded like the typical response of a defensive pet owner. "Ma'am, I understand this is upsetting," he said, in a tone that suggested he didn't really understand at all. "But a complaint has been filed, and I have to follow protocol. Given the nature of the allegation, an aggressive dog at large, I am required to issue you an official warning citation. If we receive another complaint of this nature, we will have to take further action, which could include seizing the animal pending a hearing." Seizing the animal. The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from my lungs. The thought of them taking Buster away, of him being locked in a cage at a shelter, terrified and confused, it was more than I could bear. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and angry. "You can't," I whispered. "You can't take my dog. He's done nothing wrong." He handed me the clipboard to sign for the citation. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. The official jargon on the paper swam before my eyes: failure to restrain, potentially dangerous animal, final warning. It felt like a nightmare. I was being punished for a crime that never happened, based on the word of a malicious liar. As I handed the clipboard back, a sense of utter hopelessness washed over me. It was his word against mine. He was a long-time resident, an HOA president. I was the relatively new neighbor he could paint as irresponsible. Who would they believe? After the officer left, I sank to the floor in my entryway and pulled Buster close, burying my face in his soft fur. He licked away my tears, whining softly, as if he understood the gravity of the threat that now hung over our lives. Mr. Finch had found the perfect weapon. He had bypassed our personal dispute and leveraged the power of the city against me. He had created a situation where one more lie, one more fabricated report, could result in my dog being taken from me. The official notice I held in my trembling hand wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a threat to my family. And in that moment, I felt completely and utterly powerless. The panic was suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. How could I possibly prove that something didn't happen? I spent the next hour in a fog of pure panic. I paced my living room, the citation clutched in my hand, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of worst-case scenarios. Buster followed me, his usual playful energy replaced by a quiet, concerned watchfulness. Every time I looked at his trusting brown eyes, a fresh wave of fear and rage washed over me. How could anyone threaten this innocent creature? How could the system be so easily manipulated by a spiteful old man? My thoughts kept circling back to the same dead end. It was my word against his. There was no evidence, no witnesses, just his lie and my truth, And in the world of official complaints, a lie on paper often carried more weight than a truth shouted into the void. I called Sarah Jenkins, my voice trembling as I recounted the visit from Officer Davis. She was as outraged as I was. "That man is unbelievable," she fumed. "He's a known bully, Virginia. He tried to find the family on the corner because their basketball hoop was a quarter-inch too close to the sidewalk. This is what he does. He uses rules and regulations as a weapon." "But this is different, Sarah," I choked out. "This isn't about a basketball hoop. He's threatening to have Buster taken away." "I know," she said, her voice softening. "And we're not going to let that happen. Let me make some calls. I know a few other people on the HOA board who are tired of his power trips. Maybe we can build a record of his harassment." Her support was a small comfort, but I knew it wasn't enough. A history of being a petty tyrant wasn't legal proof against a specific, serious accusation. I needed something concrete. I needed to prove that Buster was in sit. With me at exactly 3:15 p.m. the previous day. But how? I hadn't taken any pictures. I didn't have a time-stamped video of us inside. My work call was audio only. There was no physical proof of my alibi. I collapsed onto my office chair, resting my head in my hands, feeling the last dregs of hope seep away. My eyes stared blankly at my dual-monitor setup, the screensaver swirling on one and my design software open on the other. And then I saw it. Tucked into the corner of my desktop was the small, unassuming icon for my security camera software. The cameras, my heart skipped a beat. A frantic, desperate hope began to bubble up from the pit of my stomach. I had installed them to deter Mr. Finch, to watch him. But in doing so, they had also been watching me, and my property. The camera on the back of the house had a complete, unobstructed view of my entire backyard. The camera on the side covered the only other possible exit point, the narrow path between our houses. If Buster had escaped, he would have had to cross the view of one of those cameras. I scrambled to open the software, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The user interface loaded, showing the live feeds. I clicked on the playback tab, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I selected the date, yesterday, and the camera feed for the backyard. The timeline appeared, a long blue bar representing 24 hours of recorded footage. I dragged the cursor to 3:00 p.m. and hit play. The video was crystal clear, high definition. I watched the shadows of the trees lengthen across my perfectly empty lawn. The footage was time-stamped in the bottom corner, the numbers ticking forward second by second. 3:05, 3:10. My breath hitched in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The cursor slid past 3:15 p.m., the exact time of the alleged incident. The yard remained empty. No Buster, no open gate, no hole under the fence, just grass, my patio furniture, and the back of my house. I fast-forwarded, scanning the entire 2-hour block from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Nothing. Buster was never in the yard. A huge, shuddering sigh of relief escaped me. This was it. This was the proof. I had a time-stamped video recording showing that my backyard was empty at the exact time Mr. Finch claimed my dog was in his yard. It was irrefutable. The lie was exposed. But then, a new thought, colder and more calculating, began to form in my mind. This video proved my innocence, but it didn't prove his guilt. It showed Buster wasn't there, but it didn't show what Mr. Finch was doing. What if he claimed he made a mistake with the time? He could just file another complaint with a different time, forcing me to constantly defend myself. Proving my innocence wasn't enough. I needed to prove his malice. And that's when I remembered his own words, as relayed by Officer Davis. "Escaped your property, entered his yard." How could he have seen Buster enter his yard? His property was behind the fence. The only way he could have seen that was if he was standing right there, by the fence line, in view of my camera. My curiosity piqued. I switched the playback to the camera on the side of my house. It was a less interesting view, just the narrow strip of grass and the side of his house. I scanned through the footage around the same time, and then I saw him. At 3:12 p.m., Mr. Finch walked out his side door. He wasn't looking for an escaped dog. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost predatory. He walked directly to the chain-link fence separating our properties and stood there, staring into my empty backyard. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. He unzipped it, took out a piece of what looked like jerky, and held it out, trying to push it through a gap in the fence. He made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, the kind people used to call a dog. He was trying to lure Buster. He was standing there trying to entice my dog, who wasn't even there, to come to the fence. He held the treat there for almost a minute, looking around furtively before giving up, putting the treat back in his pocket, and walking back inside. The entire sequence was captured in stunning, undeniable high definition. This was more than just a lie. This was a premeditated act. He hadn't seen an escaped dog, he had attempted to create the scene of one. He was trying to lure Buster off my property, or at the very least, to the edge of it, so he could claim the dog was being aggressive at the fence line. He had manufactured the entire incident, and my camera had recorded every second of it. The panic that had gripped me for hours was suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, hard, diamond-sharp fury. This wasn't just a glimmer of hope. This was a weapon, and I was going to use it. The fury simmering within me was a powerful motivator. For months, I had been on the defensive, reacting to Mr. Finch's petty aggressions. I had followed the rules, acted with artesy, and tried to de-escalate. Now, I finally had the upper hand. The video clip of him trying to lure my non-existent dog with a treat was the key. It transformed the situation from a he said, she said dispute into a clear case of malicious harassment and filing a false report. But I knew I had to be smart about this. A rash, emotional confrontation would be satisfying in the short term, but might not solve the problem permanently. I needed a strategy that would not only exonerate me and Buster, but would also ensure Mr. Finch never tried something like this again. My first step was to secure the evidence. I downloaded the video files from both the backyard and side yard cameras for the entire 2-hour block he had specified in his complaint. I saved them to my computer, a backup hard drive, and a cloud storage service. I made 3 separate copies of the crucial 2-minute clip showing Mr. Finch at the fence, titling it Exhibit A. I then took my phone and recorded my computer screen as I played the clip, ensuring the timestamp was clearly visible. I wanted multiple formats, multiple copies, no chance of this evidence being lost or dismissed as doctored. Next, I needed to control the narrative. My immediate instinct was to send the video to Officer Davis and demand he drop the citation and charge Mr. Finch. But I paused. What if Officer Davis just saw it as a neighborhood squabble and simply closed the case? That would let Mr. Finch off the hook. He would know I had the cameras, and his next attack would be more cunning, more difficult to disprove. No, this needed to be bigger. It needed to involve the very institution Mr. Finch used as his shield, the HOA. Sarah had mentioned that other board members were tired of his antics. This was my chance to expose him to them, to dismantle the power structure he had so carefully built for himself. I spent the rest of the day crafting a plan. It felt like one of my graphic design projects, requiring careful attention to detail, composition, and presentation. My goal was a public, undeniable, and humiliating exposure of his actions. I started by composing an email. The recipient list was carefully curated. Officer Davis, his direct supervisor at Animal Control, whose name I found on the city website, and all 4 other members of the HOA board, whose email addresses Sarah happily provided. The subject line was professional and serious. Formal response and evidence regarding Citation 743 AC and complaint filed by Wallace Finch. In the body of the email, I laid out the case with cold, factual precision. I began by stating my name, address, and the citation number. I then detailed the visit from Officer Davis and the specific allegations made by Mr. Finch. That my dog, Buster, was at large and aggressive in his yard at approximately 3:15 p.m. on the previous day. I wrote, I stated to Officer Davis at the time that this allegation was categorically false. I now have irrefutable digital evidence to substantiate my statement. I then methodically broke down the evidence. Attachment 1, I wrote, is a complete, unedited video file from my backyard security camera, timestamped from 2:00 p.m. to 10:00 p.m. As you will see, the yard is empty for the entire duration. My dog never enters the yard, let alone escapes from it. I continued, this footage alone is sufficient to prove that the complaint filed by Mr. Finch is false. However, I also have evidence that demonstrates Mr. Finch's actions were not a mistake, but a deliberate and malicious fabrication. This was the masterstroke. Attachment 2, I explained, is a video file from a second security camera. At timestamp 3:12 p.m., you will see Mr. Finch exit his home, walk to the dividing fence, and attempt to lure my dog, who was not there, with a treat. This footage proves that Mr. Finch did not witness an escaped dog. He was actively attempting to manufacture a scenario he could then misrepresent to law enforcement. I chose my words carefully, using phrases like filing a false report, malicious intent, and harassment. I wanted to make it clear that I viewed this not as a neighborhood tiff, but as a serious offense. To the HOA board members, I added a specific paragraph. As members of the HOA board, I am making you aware of this situation as it involves the conduct of our president, Mr. Finch. His use of a deliberately falsified official complaint as a tool for neighborly harassment is a profound abuse of his position and reflects poorly on our entire community. I trust you will take this matter as seriously as I do. My final move was to set the stage for a confrontation. I concluded the email by saying, I have a meeting scheduled with Officer Davis tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. at my home to present this evidence in person. I am extending an invitation to any HOA board members who wish to attend to see the evidence for themselves and discuss the implications of Mr. Finch's behavior. I didn't invite Mr. Fink. I wanted him to be summoned, not invited. After sending the email, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The trap was laid. I had presented the evidence to all the relevant parties simultaneously. Animal control now had proof of a false report. The HOA board now had proof of their president's malicious conduct. There was no way for Mr. Finch to spin this, no room for him to lie his way out. He was cornered by his own actions, captured in crystal-clear digital reality. I spent the evening not in fear, but in anticipation. I gave Buster an extra-long belly rub. Tomorrow, I whispered to him as he rested his head on my lap, tomorrow we get justice. The next morning felt charged with electricity. I was nervous, but it was the jitters of a performer before a big show, not the cold dread of a victim. I set up my laptop on my coffee table, the video files queued up and ready to play on my large TV. At 9:50 a.m., Sarah Jenkins arrived, offering a plate of muffins and a reassuring smile. 2 of the other board members are coming, she whispered, her eyes alight with excitement. Janet and Tom. They replied to your email within minutes. They are not happy with Wallace. This was even better than I had hoped. Having a majority of the board present would lend the proceedings an official weight. At precisely 10:00 a.m., Officer Davis's vehicle pulled up. This time he wasn't alone. A woman in a supervisor's uniform was with him. My email had clearly been effective. As they walked up my driveway, 2 other cars pulled up, and Janet, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, and Tom, a mild-mannered man in his 60s, got out. We all convened on my porch. Virginia Miller? The supervisor asked. I'm Sergeant Peters. We received your email. We take allegations of false reporting very seriously. I nodded and invited everyone inside. The atmosphere was tense and formal. I offered them coffee, and we all sat in my living room, a strange assembly of neighbors and law enforcement. As you all saw in the email, I began, my voice steady, a complaint was made against my dog yesterday. Officer Davis issued me this citation. I held up the paper. The complaint is entirely fabricated. First, I'd like to show you the footage from my backyard. I clicked play. On the 50-inch screen, my empty yard appeared, the timestamp ticking away in the corner. We watched in silence as the clock passed 3:15 p.m. As you can see, I said, pausing the video, my dog was not in the yard and the fence was secure. Officer Davis was stone-faced, but Sergeant Peters was nodding slowly, her eyes fixed on the screen. Tom and Janet exchanged a look of grim confirmation. "Now," I said, taking a deep breath, "I'd like to show you why I know this was not a simple mistake on Mr. Finch's part." I opened the second file. This is from a camera on the side of the house. The footage began, and the room was utterly silent. We watched as the digital version of Mr. Finch emerged from his house, walked to the fence, and pulled out the dog treat. The clicking sound he made was faintly audible on the camera's microphone. We saw him trying to coax a dog that wasn't there. We saw him looking around, as if to ensure no one was watching. The 2-minute clip played out in excruciating detail. When it was over, I clicked pause, leaving his image frozen on the screen, a lonely, pathetic figure caught in a moment of petty malice. A heavy silence filled the room. Janet was the first to speak, her voice dripping with contempt. "That's Wallace. That's him, all right." Tom just shook his head slowly, looking disgusted. Sergeant Peters turned to Officer Davis. "The citation is rescinded, effective immediately. Please file a report for filing a false claim. We'll be paying a visit to Mr. Finch." She then turned to me. "Ms. Miller, I sincerely apologize for the distress this has caused you. This evidence is unequivocal. Thank you for providing it." Just as she finished speaking, there was a knock on the door. My heart leaped. I knew who it had to be. Sarah went to the door and opened it to reveal Mr. Finch looking flustered and angry. "What is going on here?" he demanded, trying to peer inside. "I saw the board members' cars." Janet stood up and walked to the door, blocking his entry. "Wallace, we need to talk to you," she said, her tone icy. "There's been a complaint, a serious one." Seeing the animal control officers, his face paled. He had clearly been summoned by the board after they received my email, and he had walked directly into my carefully prepared ambush. "We've all seen the video, Wallace," Tom said, standing up as well. "The video of you at Ms. Miller's fence yesterday." The color drained completely from Mr. Finch's face. He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked from the board members to the officers, his eyes wide with panic. The mask of the righteous, rule-following HOA president had been ripped away, revealing the bitter, manipulative bully underneath. "We will be calling an emergency meeting of the HOA," Janet announced, her voice ringing with authority. "And the first item on the agenda will be a vote for your immediate removal as president. I believe your conduct speaks for itself." Sergeant Peters then stepped forward. "Mr. Wallace Finch," she said, her voice official and commanding, "we need to speak with you about filing a false report to a city agency. It's a misdemeanor offense. We can do this here, or we can do it at your house." Humiliation washed over him in visible waves. His neighbors, the board he commanded, and law enforcement were all standing in my house, having just witnessed definitive proof of his deceit. He had been exposed completely and utterly. He didn't say a word. He just turned, head bowed, and walked back towards his own house, with Sergeant Peters and Officer Davis following close behind. The public humiliation he had intended for me had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. As he walked away, I felt a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It was over. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the change in the neighborhood was almost immediate and palpable. The cloud of tension that had seemed to hang over Mr. Finch's corner of the street dissipated. The emergency HOA meeting was held 2 days later. I didn't attend, but Sarah gave me a full report. Apparently, Mr. Finch didn't even show up. The remaining board members, led by Janet and Tom, presented the case against him. They didn't have to show my video. A description of his actions was enough. The vote for his removal as president was unanimous. They also voted to formally censure him for his behavior and issue a written warning that any further harassment of any neighbor would result in the HOA pursuing legal action against him. He was stripped of all power and left with a stark warning. As for his legal troubles, Mr. Finch was charged with filing a false report. Given that it was a minor offense and he had no prior record, he wasn't facing jail time, but he was required to pay a hefty fine and attend a mandatory anger management course. The city's official dismissal of the citation against Buster arrived in my mail a week later, along with a formal letter of apology from the head of the Animal Control Department. I framed it. It was a symbol of my victory, a reminder that the truth, when backed by undeniable proof, is a powerful thing. My relationship with Mr. Finch, if you could call it that, became one of complete and utter silence. He seemed to have shrunk into himself. I no longer saw him standing on his deck, monitoring the neighborhood. He stopped his meticulous, obsessive yard work. He became a ghost in his own immaculate house. When we did happen to cross paths, me walking Buster, him getting his mail, he would refuse to make eye contact, his face fixed in a permanent scowl of bitter defeat. He never spoke to me again, and he certainly never left another note on my door. The thorny rose bushes along the fence began to look untended and scraggly, and I had no problem trimming back the parts that encroached on my yard. The war was over, and I had won. But the most significant change wasn't about Mr. Finch, it was about the rest of us. The story of the video and his public downfall spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I became something of a local hero. People I'd only ever waved to before would stop me on my walks to congratulate me. They shared their own stories of Mr. Finch's petty tyrannies, the warnings about holiday decorations, the complaints about kids' toys left on lawns, the endless stream of passive-aggressive notes. It turned out that nearly everyone had a story. They had all been quietly tolerating his behavior for years, feeling isolated and powerless. My standing up to him, and so publicly exposing him, seemed to have liberated everyone. A new sense of community began to form. Sarah organized a neighborhood block party a month later, the first one in years. Mr. Finch, predictably, did not attend. It was a wonderful afternoon. People laughed and shared food, and kids drew with chalk on the sidewalk. Buster was the guest of honor, receiving more ear scratches and treats than he knew what to do with. Tom, the new interim HOA president, made a short, informal speech. "I think we all learned a valuable lesson recently," he said, catching my eye and smiling. "This is our neighborhood. We should be looking out for each other, not looking for reasons to tear each other down." A cheer went up from the crowd. Life in my little slice of heaven truly became heavenly. The peace I had so desperately craved was finally real. I could work in my office without feeling watched. I could play with Buster in the yard without a sense of dread. The security cameras I had installed as a defensive measure now felt more like a simple precaution, their purpose fulfilled. That single 2-minute video clip had done more than just save my dog. It had dismantled a bully's reign of terror, brought a community closer together, and restored peace to our street. And every time I look at Buster, happy and safe, I'm reminded that sometimes fighting back isn't just about getting revenge. It's about protecting the life you've worked so hard to build. It was a fight I never wanted, but one I am eternally grateful I won.